Hey everyone, today is going to be an exciting day because we are finally doing our culminating video with the Century Arms VSKA because we are now at 5,000 rounds. Now, in a lot of the more recent, consecutive 1,000 round update videos, I've been mostly going over just that 1,000 rounds and referring you back to previous videos. And I'm going to kind of do that again here, but in this video, I really want to go in depth into what my experience has been overall. I did review some of the pictures and footage from those first 4,000 rounds just to make sure everything is nice and fresh in my memory. And I have already cleaned this and taken pictures of all the internals so that you guys can see where the wear at is with this rifle. And I've actually already filmed this review once. However, the day I was out at the range doing those videos, I forgot to turn the microphone on the camera on. So I lost all of that footage and I'm now having to reshoot the video, but we're going to make do and get this done in as effective a way as possible. Now, one of the things I did do out there is do the headspace check, but now that I've done a more thorough cleaning, I'm going to go ahead and do that again just for completeness' sake in this video. Now, in this last 1,000 rounds, I shot exclusively Red Army Standard provided by Century Arms through these new US Palm mags. I have, I think, 3 or 4 of these black US Palm mags, and then I have an original US Palm mag that I did do a little bit of shooting with as well. So I was able to get a pretty good idea of how these mags are going to be holding up now that I've done this entire last 1,000 rounds, plus the majority of a couple of previous 1,000 rounds, just using these US Palm mags to get a good idea how those do. But I'll probably go a little bit more in depth into these in a dedicated video. So let's kind of rewind the clock back a little bit and talk about what the experience was with this thing early on, what some of my first impressions were, and how things have gotten us to where we are now. So first 1,000 rounds is the only time that I ran into any malfunctions with this gun. And if you remember, that was when I was doing a magwell hold. It would occasionally, with a very certain specific magazine, steel surplus magazine, it would lock the bolt open on the mag because the mag could rock far enough back. Typically, when I would let go of the mag, it would drop the bolt. But once I was able to isolate that one magazine, I've done that several times since, and that hasn't been an issue. One of the other things I complained about early on was the recoil impulse being not super great with the slant brake. And I've kind of just said that about every AK that I've ever used with just a slant brake. I'm not a fan of it. The way it directs the recoil impulse means that the stock is usually punching you in the cheek pretty good. So originally Century Arms sent me out one of their modern 74 brakes, which definitely alleviated the issue. And then Midwest Industries had me try out one of their 2-chamber brakes, and that has been what's remained on this thing for the most amount of time, because I really do like it. It's a very kind of a similar design, but it is very effective, and it's also very cost effective, although so is the modern 74 brake from Century Arms. So again, we've got to fix the recoil impulse issue up here. One of the other things you might remember me mentioning early on and kind of in every video is that the upper handguard was always a little bit loose. Now, it came out of the box like that. If anything, to me, it was a little bit reassuring because if they had really hand-selected a rifle to send out to me, because I guess full disclosure, if you haven't seen those previous videos, Century Arms did provide me with the rifle and ammunition for testing to get this thing to 5,000 rounds. But because of the wobble, it made me feel a little bit better in thinking that, again, if they had hand-selected one, it probably wouldn't have been one that had loose furniture. So I guess for what that's worth. However, due to the repeated heavy heat cycles that I've gone through with this rifle, going through usually 100 or so rounds at a time very, very quickly, letting it cool and going back and forth, the lower handguard has just barely started to get some wobble in it as well. And when I show the pictures of the internals later on, you'll see that it's definitely experienced some heat. But again, everything is holding up integrity-wise very well. And speaking to that, as I've said with the stock in the previous videos, this thing has not even begun to loosen on me at all. I haven't had to retighten it at all Although I am now just seeing, I don't know how I missed this before, but it is just starting to crack right at the very top of the stock, right to the rear of the tang. And honestly, like I said, this is the first time I'm noticing this as I film this video. I missed this earlier. So I'll take a picture of that and include it. Here I am about to talk about how the stock has held up well, not come loose. And while it hasn't come loose, I do now see a crack on the top of the tang. It's a minor crack right now, but it is there. One of the other complaints that I had early on about the VSKA is the lack of an optic rail on the side here. Now, one of the big things that I did in this last 1,000 rounds, and why it kind of took a little bit longer to get to this video than I would have otherwise liked to, is global pandemics shutting down the range that I normally shoot at. Not because they were required to, but because they chose to, which is why I'm no longer a member at that range. But the new range that I've been shooting at, it's been a lot more interesting to get footage out there anyway, because I can do a lot more. But I had an optic rail installed by the gunsmith that I work with at the gun store that I'm an employee at. And that has allowed me to do a lot of shooting with this thing with optics, and will eventually lead to me being able to do a little bit more accuracy testing, because I've said all along that this is probably the most accurate AK I own, but due to my inability to shoot exceptionally well with AK irons, I haven't been able to make full use of that. So hopefully I'll be doing that very, very soon. I was running a Midwest Industries optic rail on the side, and you'll see that in a lot of the footage with this thing. However, if you guys saw my video I did at SHOT Show with Century Arms, they told me to treat this thing a little bit more aggressively in the last 1,000 rounds. And a friend of mine definitely took that to heart, and we were doing transition drills. He was just kind of chucking the rifle on the ground as he transitioned to his pistol, and somewhere along the way the optic rail actually bent a little bit, so now it will not hold zero. Well, it lost 0, and now it's bent enough that I can't actually get it 0. So I'm going to be seeing if Midwest Industries will send me out a replacement top rail there, but I do also have a railed, just fully railed side mount from them that I'll probably put a magnified scope on and see what kind of groups we can get with these. That's probably going to be in another video, because this one's probably going to be long enough as it is. Well, you guys probably already know, because you know the timestamp or the time thing on the bottom of the video. So I was able to get that installed. That is not something that would necessarily be easy or cheap to do yourself. If you have the tools to do it, you probably would already do it, so that's not an issue. But for those of us who are not AK armorers, I did have to pay a gunsmith to do that. And to me, it's worth it. Maybe most people might just want to keep a bog standard AK-47 with iron sights. I like putting optics on stuff, and so I had that done. Now, before I get too in-depth into what my overall thoughts are about this rifle, what my overall experience has been over the last 5,000 rounds through this rifle, I want to talk a little bit about how the internals are holding up on this rifle. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I have had a chance to take this thing apart completely. I really detailed cleaned it this time. Usually in between each 1,000 rounds, I would clean it enough to get pictures, but I didn't completely disassemble it, take everything apart, clean everything, inspect everything. This time I did do it because I really wanted to do a deep dive after 5,000 rounds. And I have to say, this thing is holding up very, very well. If you saw the last video I did, you'll know that I started to mention a little bit of wear forming on the side of the bolt carrier where it rides on the rails. And when I was reviewing some of the previous videos I've done, I found that that's actually something that's been there since the first 1,000 rounds. And it hasn't gotten any worse. Again, if you want, you can go back and watch some of those videos. But the severity of the deformation has not gotten any worse. And speaking of deformation, really the only other deformation is on the tail of the bolt carrier, which is just something that's going to happen. However, compared to other guns that I've seen out there, this one is totally in line with a normal wear that you would expect to see after 5,000 rounds. It's in line with the Arsenal AKs that I have, and it's in line with all the other AKs that I've had. It's deformed slightly, but again, it kind of plateaued very quickly and hasn't gotten any worse since. The peening that I've mentioned throughout the process against the front trunnion and against the rear trunnion from the excessive bolt velocity is still there, but again, hasn't gotten any worse. So I mean, you'll see those marks in the pictures, but again, it hasn't gotten worse. And again, everything seems to be holding up very, very well. The gas piston is good. All the rails internally are good. All the locking surfaces are good. Everything is holding up exceptionally well. Now, as I continue to roll through the pictures of everything here, I want to talk a little bit about some of the preconceived notions that people have regarding the wear on the Century Arms AK, specifically the VSKA. I'll be the first to admit that the RS-47 is not a good gun when it comes to trusting the heat treating that those components received. I had a RS-47. I was probably the first person to have an actual review of the RS-47. And while mine held up pretty well, there are a lot of documented issues out there with RS-47s. Because of that, people automatically hold a grudge against the VSKAs, whether or not it actually deserves it. And now that there's been several 5,000 round videos done, now with myself being included in that, I feel like they've kind of proven themselves. Even then, though, there are people who still want to hold on to this idea that it's absolute garbage. And so to demonstrate that, there's a Facebook group that I recently joined, and completely independently of me doing this process, the admin or whoever runs that page decided to do a little bit of trolling of some Facebook groups or whatever, wherever it was, AK groups. After seeing it, I got permission from him to use these screenshots because I think it demonstrates this issue perfectly. So what he did was he took a picture of a bolt face on an AK and he posted it on one of these forum sites. And he said, hey, this is the bolt of my VSKA. Does this wear look normal to you guys after X amount of rounds? And everyone was saying, oh no, that thing's garbage. That thing's getting ready to blow up. That's a ticking time bomb. That looks horrible. That looks atrocious, etc., etc. You guys can imagine. Again, I'll show you the screenshots. He took that same picture, flipped it 180 degrees, I guess, to make it different enough. And then I don't know if it was on the same group or if it was in a different forum or anything like that. But he posted the picture and said, hey, this is the bolt face for my Wasser 10. Does this wear look normal? And everyone's response was, oh, you're totally good. Send it. You know, that thing's just starting to break in. You've got, no issue whatsoever. So even though it was the same bolt face with the same amount of wear on it, just hearing that it was a VSKA got people to say it's garbage, or just hearing that it was a Wasser had people saying that it's gold and you don't have to worry about it. So it just goes to show the preconceived notions that people who that people have towards the VSKA and every other Century Arms product. And again, I'm not saying not all of them deserve it, but the VSKA I think should be evaluated on its own merits. And again, I think at this point it has demonstrated itself to be a very well built rifle, at least in regards to reliability and durability. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and do the no-go test. I'm going to do it with the same climber no-go gauge, the same way that I've tested it every other time. So I pulled the recoil spring out. I'm going to try to lock the no-go gauge under the lip of the extractor, just so the extractor is not playing a role. We're going to guide that into the chamber and push, nothing, push, nothing. That's not even the way you're supposed to do it. It's supposed to be even pressure, but just to demonstrate, I want to try to force it in, and it's not going to close. So try to do this gently so it doesn't go flying. Still well within headspace. I think this thing, like I said, has many thousands of rounds of life still left in it. And I feel comfortable saying that that's going to be the case with pretty much any VSKA, considering all the 5,000 round tests out there that have just kind of borne that out to be the case. So at this point, I want to talk about what my overall experience has been. So again, I had some malfunctions right out the gate, but since then, and especially after identifying the problematic magazine, I haven't had any more issues since. It's really been a very boring 5,000 rounds, which is a good thing when you're talking about a gun that you might be potentially trusting your life to. Now, I don't want people to get that confused with me saying that this is the best AK on the market. I am not saying that, and I don't think Century Arms would say that either. However, what this is a very good option for people trying to get into the AK market without having to break the bank. And the price that these come in at makes it very appealing to people, again, in that market. The other important thing I think we all need to take into consideration, and something I've heard people say before, but I think bears repeating, it is very important for us to have a domestic source for AK rifles. We've seen over the last 8 to 10 years the amount of legislation, whether that be purely in the executive branch or in the legislative branch, that has limited the importation of AK style rifles, whether it be just by the simple design of them or due to import restrictions from specific countries. That's driven the price up on the ones already in the country and made it unattainable for just your average Joe to get or get into. With companies like Century Arms making these ones here in the country, especially at the price point that they're able to come in at, I think it's a very good thing. Now, I also want to touch on this idea that people say, like, how come American companies can't get this right when, you know, Joe Schmo in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan can hammer out a rifle? So, first of all, that's not exactly what's happening over there. But you have to understand the COMBLOC countries that have been producing rifles and that we've been importing rifles from, those were not private endeavors that set up the machining and infrastructure to build those rifles. Those were state-sponsored factories. So the government was fitting the bill to build those factories, train those workers, build the machines, build the infrastructure to make those rifles. That's why they could be imported for so cheap, is because after being produced for 30 years by babushkas in their little bonnets on the assembly line, they're making them for dirt cheap over there. The domestically produced ones, whether it be from Century Arms, Palmetto State Armory, Riley Defense, these are companies that are trying to start up from scratch and build the infrastructure to build rifles. That means that even at a lower cost, they're having to make some sacrifices, and in a lot of cases, that's features. So again, with the VSKA, you don't have the included side rail. You don't have the bayonet lug now, or allocation for a cleaning rug. Now, part of that could also be 50-state compliance, which I don't think these are 50-state compliant anyway. But again, we have to take into consideration what these American companies are working with and what they've been able to overcome. Again, I'm not trying to tell you that they're the best AKs in the world, but we all have to take into consideration what the reality of the market is and what that means for companies trying to get into the AK market. So to hopefully start to wrap things up, I want to talk about still, again, after 5,000 rounds, what I think the pros are of a rifle like this and what the cons are. So let's go ahead and start with the cons, and then we'll finish on a high note, I guess. So cons. As I mentioned, no allocation for a cleaning rod. In my opinion, the whole thing about AKs is their hell and back reliability or their ease of maintenance. And while I fully acknowledge that AKs are not just, pure stud of a reliable rifle, there are things that can make them fail. And even if the rifle itself doesn't fail, the ammunition can fail. You can get stock cases, you can get squib loads, and having a cleaning rod makes it possible for me to now alleviate those issues and get the rifle back up and running. Also, just AKs look right with a cleaning rod underneath. I could care less about the bayonet lug, but I still want it because this is America and I should be able to have bayonet mounts, if not actual bayonets, on my guns. But at least give me the cleaning rod. And even if you're not going to include the cleaning rod, like Palmetto State Armory gives you the slot for it, but doesn't give you a cleaning rod, at least give me the spot for it. Give me the option of buying one for myself and putting it in there. Again, I'm speaking out of turn here because I don't know, but it can't be that hard. Again, I get that there might be some compliance issues that they're trying to avoid, but give me my cleaning rod. I know they're fixing that with newer models, but not of the VSKA, but of other guns they're working on, but just I want the cleaning rod. Second of all, there is no reason that these should not come with optic rails from the factory. They have holes already drilled in the receiver for optic rails, but then they just cap them. They don't actually give you the optic rail. And especially after the RAS 47, I thought that was something they were for sure going to do with the VSKAs. And again, the fact that there were holes for it I don't know. Again, I know that's something they're addressing with newer models coming out. Again, not of the VSKA, but in my opinion, there is no reason that a modern AK, especially a full 16-inch rifle AK, should not have one of these installed at the factory, because great, these are affordable rifles for you to get into the AK with, but now if I do want to use modern optics without changing out my handguard up here, I'm having to put in a pretty, sizable investment to get one of those installed. As far as other cons, it's not an issue with this one, but again, I do work full-time at a gun store where we have had several VSKAs, and we've sold several VSKAs. I myself have been able to tell people about mine and let them look at mine and say why the VSKA is a safe investment. But we've gotten some of the polymer furniture VSKAs in, and I can say without hesitation, do not buy a polymer furnitured VSKA unless you know you're going to swap out the furniture. The furniture that comes on those, I'm sorry, Century, is absolute trash. The first thing we do when we get one in at the store is completely swap it out for Magpul furniture. The stocks are absolutely unusable, in my opinion. The hand guards are just ugly and don't even feel good. So just don't get the polymer furnitured ones, again, unless you know you're going to swap it out to something. That being said, the wood ones have all been really good. Again, we've transferred through many of these. We've sold many of these, and I get to handle each one. And mine is the only one I felt that actually had wobbly furniture. Again, at least straight out the gate. Who knows what'll happen after 5,000 rounds, but none of them have had the wobbly furniture issue, which again makes me confident that things are good to go and that this is not just a sample of one that I've had experience with. So that's really kind of it as far as the negatives go. So let's get into the positives. So first of all, price. Obviously, like I said, the prices of the imported AKs has just continued to go up and up and up. The days of the $350 Wasser 10s is over. I have to hear about it all the time working at a gun store. Well, why can't I find cheap AKs anymore? Again, all the reasons I listed earlier. So now stuff in the $600 to $700 range is the entry level AK. And that's kind of where this one falls in, depending on configuration, depending on furniture. That's kind of the ballpark range you're looking at. And again, in that ballpark, in my opinion, this is a very good rifle as far as the durability of the parts. Again, I've tested the Palmetto State Armory GF3, and I think after 5,000 rounds, the internals on this look better than the 2,000 rounds that I put through the Palmetto State. Actually, I just thought of one more thing that I don't like about this, so we're going to quickly go back to cons before we, again, finish out on positives. The light and bolt carrier group, or like carrier, the lightened carrier. I don't like the lightened carrier. I don't like the excessive bolt velocity that you get. I think that's what's contributing to the peening on the rear of the carrier on the rear trunnion and the front of the carrier on the front trunnion. If it had a full weight bolt carrier group, and I've heard from people who might have tried this, it gets rid of that issue entirely. I don't understand it. Just don't do that. To me, that's also adding an extra failure point that it doesn't need. Just give me a full weight bolt carrier, and I think everything will be fine. Not a huge deal, but just something I don't like. So jumping back into positives. Again, accuracy. Like I've said, I think this is the most accurate AK I own just from doing the little bit of testing I've done. And will continue to do, hopefully, when I do my dedicated video on it. This thing has done very, very well on accuracy. We'll find out exactly how much that is and quantify that, hopefully, in an upcoming video, which will be linked once that video is up. But a very accurate AK for what it is. I'm not going to tell you one MOA accurate, but for an AK, it's doing really, really good. One of the other big things that I like, and it's a relatively minor thing you would think, but the oversized mag release on this thing is, I think, one of the best features. Now, I've heard some people say, well, it increases the likelihood of accidentally hitting that mag release. I just don't see that happening. The wings of the mag release are skinnier than the width of a standard magazine. Also the width of the receiver. So the likelihood of it being able to catch on things when the rest of the gun isn't, I think is very, very low. And I can say quantitatively that it makes my mag changes far, far faster and easier with that paddle mag release than it does with just the standard com lock mag release. So in fact, I'm looking at having these style mag releases installed on some of my other AKs just because I am such a fan of that oversized mag release that is standard on the American Century Arms AKs. Now, lastly, and probably most importantly for most people out there, of things that I like about this is just the durability of the components. So they are using S7 tool steel, and to be honest with you, a lot of that stuff goes right over my head as far as different steels and different materials and how they hold up. That stuff makes me fall asleep. But from being able to look at the internals of this thing, it is holding up exceptionally well. Again, after 5,000 rounds, this thing looks better than some of my other AKs looked after 1,000 to 2,000 rounds. And I have a feeling, again, based on where the wear pattern is now and how it's kind of progressed and plateaued, I think that this thing would be very, very solid for many, many more thousands of rounds, which is obviously a really, really good thing. And especially if it's something that you might trust your life to. So I guess in summary, is it as good as an Arsenal? Would I replace my Arsenal with this? No. But if you're looking for a good way to get into the AK world, does the VSKA work very well for that kind of person? Absolutely. If you're just looking, also, let's say you have other AKs, you're just looking for one that you can just throw in the bed of your truck and not have to worry too much about. Again, I think that this would fit that very, very well. And I think it's worth mentioning, my brother has been asking me about getting an AK, and I might let him have this one. And if I'm willing to let my brother potentially trust his life to it, I think that that should say something. I guess maybe you guys don't know the relationship with me and my brother. Maybe it's a terrible one, in which case it would make total sense to some of you why I'd give this to him. But I do actually like my brother. So me letting him trust his life to something like this potentially should hopefully be a good sign. So as I wrap up this video, I want to say thanks to Century Arms for sending out this rifle for testing and the ammo to go with it. I was one of the people who was very hesitant about the VSKA when it first came out, and I appreciate them being willing to let me be a guinea pig, I guess, and try one out, even with me being vocally opposed to them when they first came out. So I do appreciate their willingness to let me try it out and I guess make a believer out of myself. And the ammo, especially, that stuff is not cheap. That's one reason why I stopped the PSA AK at 2,000 rounds. Is ammo's not cheap, and I don't have enough funding from YouTube or even Patreon to just justify buying cases and cases of ammo to continue just burning through guns. So because of them, I was able to make that happen. I do want to say thanks to my Patreon patrons still, even if I can't afford a case of ammo to just burn through guns. They do provide me with the ability to at least justify taking time to go out to the range. They also give me very valuable feedback. I post all my videos over there early, so it lets them kind of give me some feedback and let them tell me what they think. We also do live streams where we're able to kind of talk directly, more or less one-on-one, because there's usually not too many people in the live streams, and get, again, really good feedback and stuff that they want to see in upcoming videos. So if any of that stuff sounds interesting to you, or you just want to financially support the channel, definitely check out my link to Patreon down below. But anyway, with all that being said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.